I feel like the worst offenders were Finn Wolfhard and
You say
then
worst offenders. All they did was go through puberty. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Survive This Crit. You're clicking on this video because you wanted to learn more about It Chapter 2, where we'll be diving into special effects, casting, and the book versus a movie. So buckle up and enjoy with us. And with me, as always, is my co-host.
Howdy everyone, I'm Nick.
And I'm Kylie. And we're here to talk more to you about It Chapter 2. So, Nick, let's dive right in. Our last episode, some of our biggest griefs and biggest highlights were the special effects. And there was a mix of practical and CGI effects in this film. So let's dive right in. I will start us off with a quote from Andy Muschietti, the director, who said he prefers to use practical effects over CGI whenever possible.
So what happened in this movie is my question.
Right? Yeah, I do feel like CGI was used pretty heavy-handedly in this movie. I will
Which is
say,
fair
I'm
when
going
you
to
got
point
a
out,
giant spider monster thing, you know. But what about the other stuff?
well, don't worry, I have some of them written down. Let's talk about the practical effects first, since I think you and I both, for the films that we've reviewed in the past 2 years, which is crazy, almost 3 years, we tend to lean on films that enjoy practical effects. I think one of the most notable is the deflating Pennywise scene. And this
That's
is
a
from the.
child?
Yeah, so when he's scramming away, I'll show a clip of that. It's a child. That's a child.
Wow,
And then, yeah, you see him right there. And then for the adult scene, we'll skip ahead a little bit. They make him look so scared. So as you see here, they have what appears to be a prosthetic body. They have a fake body, and Bill Skarsgård's head is in there. And his head is behind some sort of rig so he can stand with his hands and everything, but that's a fake body underneath him. That's a good example of the practical effects. As you can see, as they're like working on his head here, that's all real. None of that CGI.
He looks so unenthused to be there, you know.
That's Megamind when he has a bad head day. But
Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
I thought that was really interesting. I just wanted to share that
I
because
like that. You know, honestly, the him deflating wasn't the worst thing out of all the things, you know. I could
well,
definitely
because a
look at
lot
that
of
and
it was
just be like, oh, that's
practical.
fun. I thought it was very funny because like you get this little image like they're reaching out for his heart and he just has like a tiny hand. He's like, no.
Yeah, he does, and it's actually kind of funny because he's like, he looks scared too. He's like, and but he can't do anything about it. And so it's really entertaining at that point. And like wounds and stuff, that was all practical. Because he gets like Eddie gets stabbed in the cheek. That's practical. So there was a good use of like baseline practical effects. Jessica Chastain's scene, for example, the blood scene, 4,500 gallons of fake blood. And the final
No.
scene is in a soundstage with hundreds of thousands of gallons of water in a 75 square foot soundstage. They did a baseline of practical effects, but I think due to trying to live up to the morbid descriptions of Stephen King and the like ethereal and otherworldly descriptions of Stephen King, they really went quite a aggressive CGI route. And I think, Nick, you have some, and I have some too, on probably the biggest use of CGI, which was actually de-aging software.
Yeah, and so the thing I've been reading about this is that this came at a time. So this movie came out like 2019, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so this movie came out about 2019, and a lot of what people mention is that this seems to be, and as I look back, I think it's true, the age of de-aging people
Mm. Oh,
because we
interesting.
because before this, in that same year, we also had a movie with Will Smith called Gemini Man, which is literally him versus his younger self. The year before that, we got a de-age Nick Fury and Captain Marvel. Point is that like de-aging has just become a bit more had become a bit more popular in that time.
Hmm.
Honestly, I don't know. Have you seen it around recently in anything? Do you feel like?
I honestly can't think that I have. I feel like I know part of why they did this is because a lot of the actors looked a lot older. Like Sophia Lillis didn't look a lot older, so they actually didn't do much work on her. But like Finn Wolfhard went through puberty between the first
Yeah,
movie and the second movie, so he looked entirely different.
yeah. So that was something I was going to bring up was that like so I feel like the worst offenders were Finn Wolfhard and
You say
then
worst offenders, all they did was go through puberty.
no, 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 no. I'm not saying Finn himself is the offender. Just he was the vessel for being offended, the audience being offended. He
Right,
was
right.
simply the vessel through which the offense came through.
Hmm.
But my point is this: season two of Stranger Things came out the same year as It Chapter One, and
Mm.
season three came out the same year as It Chapter Two, which is a funny coincidence how those all happened within a year of each other like that.
Yeah.
But it gives you a good point of reference for what Finn Wolfhard actually looks like because season two Stranger Things, he pretty much just looks like how he does. He just looks like how he does in chapter one. But then season three, he visibly grew so much.
He really did.
He was much larger, more mature. But it chapter two, which happened maybe like a month after that came out, or
Hmm.
a few months after, he we see him looking kind of like his younger self again. So
Wow.
it's very obvious.
It is like a little mind-boggling. I'm sorry. I'm just going back to like I pulled up season 1 and season 2, and that man, he's a man now. He's an adult probably. He
Definitely.
grew up in that season. It's crazy how much of an adult he became between season 2 and 3.
Yes, it is pretty crazy. I remember thinking that myself when I first saw it. And so it's very obvious that they had to do something to him for it chapter two, if that's coming
Yeah,
out the
because they
same
couldn't recast him. I'm sure there was like, besides his acting ability, audiences would be like, "What the you recast like half the cast?" But that happens a lot in TV shows, especially with when they're like kids aging into older
year.
characters. They often get recast because either they're not as good of actors or they age out of the role, so they end up casting somebody younger. So I'm glad they
Yeah.
didn't do that. And honestly, as much crap as everyone talks about the de-aging, I honestly didn't even notice it.
Yeah, the
Maybe I'm
only
just not
reason I
paying
feel like
enough
I noticed it
attention.
with Finn, besides like the obvious, like, okay, that's what he looks like in Strange Things season three, is that you
Hmm.
just see how they kind of do like the obvious, like his glasses are so huge, like they just
Yeah.
feel so huge, and I feel like they have this
My
way of just like making his
glasses.
eyes seem bigger, but the rest of his. This is actually something I read. I was reading a little bit about how the de aging was applied,
Hmm.
and the main thing I noticed is like the goal of the de-aging a big part of it was just making their heads seem a little bit smaller.
I'm
Somehow
sorry,
by
that's
making
just
their heads
funny.
by making them a little bit smaller, kind of gave that illusion that they were younger.
Yeah.
And I feel like Finn's just had a bit more editing. Definitely, you get that sense of like big head when you compare it with what his glasses look like.
They had to shrink his size too, because so they did do full body scans of everybody because they had to make him visibly look a lot smaller because he went from being like the one of the smallest people in the cast to one of the tallest within like 2 years. And they
Yeah,
actually, as a fun fact, they did a lot of the actors had to do their lines ahead of time, like dub their lines because their voices had gotten so much deeper that they had to dub their lines in a higher register ahead of time. And Eddie, they almost brought in, I think, a voice actor for Eddie, because his voice had dropped so much that they were worried that he wasn't going to be able to do his own flashback lines, but he did.
Yeah, well, so that's impressive to hear because honestly, my point of reference for that particular actor is the movie Shazam, because that also came out like within a year of it Chapter Two's release, and
Mm-hmm.
he just so much older in that film. So that's why I also feel like he was like the second worst when it came to digital de-aging, because
Mm-hmm.
like like it's really tough for me to describe when exactly I saw it, but I feel like there were just certain scenes where like you blink and miss, and his body just seemed a little misshapen or just a little odd, like it was a little bit bigger than you would
Like if you
expect it
pause
to
it
be.
at a weird point, you'd see that like proportions are off or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So, that was me just kind of looking at it through the eyes of someone who knows that this is going on, and so I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious and trying to catch it. When I first saw it in theaters, mostly it was just Finn was the one I noticed a little bit, but even then, I just chose not to be offended by it and just continued watching it.
I feel like if I had watched it on the big screen, I probably would have noticed the de-aging more. Because then you're putting everything on like a 70-foot screen. What I wanted to add back to the de-aging was that there were like over 200 visual effects shots for the flashbacks. So they had a lot of work to do for this de-aging. And they had a crew of 20 visual effects people to make sure that they maintained the character consistency, at least the best they could. Because again, Finn Wolfhard grew like a foot, and Sophia Lillis barely
Maybe.
changed at all. So it made it really challenging, I think, for them to try to consistently make these characters look the way they should. I wanted to add a couple more visual effects things that I looked up. Um, the fortune cookie scene. A lot of those were actually puppets, which I thought was
Yes, I
really
heard about
cool.
that. I heard for the fortune cookies, that was more practical effects
Mm-hmm.
with like those chattering teeth. They had like
Yeah.
little gears for that inside of the cookies. And so they just kind of set those off so the cookies would like shake and vibrate. Then it led to such a gross thing when the first little bug thing comes out of the
Mm-hmm.
fortune cookie and you get a good look at it. It's got like a baby face. And I was like, this is no, that is biblical is what that is. That is something straight out of
I think
Revelations.
that's what they were trying to go for, though, is like spiritual entity, like level of nasty. I think also I wanted to add on to that. So the crawling eyes and the baby bird were digital, but a lot of the rest of that was practical with the puppets. The leper slime, that was digital fluid blended with practical splatter effects. So there was a mix of digital and practical in there, which I thought was really interesting because you can't really tell.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Talking about all this really just makes me think the character of Eddie really just got the worst of it throughout this movie.
He goes
Vomited
through it
on,
just to die at the end. I honestly, this is
he
an
got stabbed in
unpopular
the face,
opinion.
got vomited on, and then he gets stabbed through the chest. Like the guy just took the worst punishment.
I would have loved in a perfect world. I'm not saying I would have liked Mike to die, but to be fair, in this version in the film, he consistently lied to all the characters and then is just standing in front of Pennywise waiting to be stabbed.
Hmm.
I almost would have been okay if he died instead of Eddie, but we wouldn't have had such a tearful like moment if that had been him. I also so the other special effects thing that I noted too was the spider creature at the very end. So that is a creature that was drawn by Andy Machete because he's a visual artist as well.
Hmm.
And then their visual effects animator really worked with him to make it come to life. But that's Bill Skarsgård's face in motion capture, so that way they can get all the expressions and all the gnarliness that he can do with his face. So I thought that was interesting. Like I feel like there are moments in this movie where they blended practical and CGI together really well. And then there were moments where it just did not work for me, i.e., the old naked woman running. And I just was
Yeah.
like, this is silly.
Yeah, no, she definitely had a comedic face. Truthfully, it would frighten me if I saw it in real life, but because it's a movie, I'm like, this is no, just no. Yeah, no. And you mentioned the motion capture thing, and now I'm just kind of picturing like Bill Skarsgård in a little studio room.
Yeah, that's something interesting to think about is that a lot of times these actors are working with a green screen and all these effects of rocks tumbling and thunder and the deadlights are all added in digitally. So
Mhm.
that's props to the actors there for playing in the space that has yet to be built. It's being sold by their performance alone at that time.
They did a pretty good job of interacting with those objects.
They
It
did.
was very
Um
believable.
so the casting of the film. I thought the casting was really fascinating. So obviously the biggest challenge for this film was casting people who looked like the original actors because obviously they cast a very talented set of kids, but then they had to cast adults who looked like them. So just to give us a visual reference here, Nick, I'm curious before I go more into the casting director, which, as you know, and as some audiences know, I'm sure at this point, I used to work in casting. I was more in background, but for TV, but there are times where you have to cast lookalikes. And when you're it's background, it's more based on photos, but this is photos and performance. So, Nick, I'm curious who you think was offer only for this, which means they didn't have to audition. And he knew that he wanted them ahead of time and had asked them to be these characters. Um, and which ones were auditioned.
Okay, I'll answer your question, but first, can I make one comment here, which is looking at this picture. Tell me
Uh huh.
why some of these actors do not look like their actual selves. Like I'm talking specifically about Beverly and Jessica Chastain, and I forget who plays younger Beverly. Both halves of the face look nothing like them for some reason.
I think it's a neck. I think it's the way the neck is cut. It makes it their necks look a lot thicker than they actually are.
Offer only. I would say who got an offer only. I feel like it'd be the biggest names here. So I'm gonna say right there at the very top, James McAvoy, Bill Hader, and Jessica Chastain did not have to audition. They just got an offer, and everyone
You
else
know
had
what?
to.
You're almost right. So, James McAvoy, he was an offer only. He was somebody who Andy Machete had in mind during part one for part two,
Mhm.
as well as Jessica Chastain. And Jessica Chastain has worked with James McAvoy before, so she was kind of a part of the convincing factor to convince him to be a part of this film. Bill Hader, though, had to audition. But what's funny is during part one, Andy Machete had kind of talked to the actors and been like, hey, kind of start thinking about, ideas maybe of who you would like to see as your characters in part two. And Finn Wolfhard was like, well, I want to see like Bill Hader in my role. And so it's kind of funny that Bill Hader, even though he still had to audition to a certain degree, he was recommended by Finn Wolfhard to play that role.
That's funny to me because now you're making me think of one of the funniest casting choices I think in this film
Yeah.
is the choice of Isaiah Mustafa.
Really?
Yes, because I'm not sure how familiar you are with early, not early, but mid to late 2000s commercials, but he's the
Mm-hmm.
Old Spice guy. Before,
Oh my
yes, he's
gosh.
the
Okay,
guy
I'm gonna
who's
have
like,
to. That's
there's so
incredible.
many commercials of him shirtless with abs, just going, "Ladies, look at your man. Now look back at me. Now back at your man. Now back at me. Now your man, unfortunately, can't be me. Hey, look, I have a clam full of tickets to that favorite show you want to see. No, 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 no. But your man can
That's
smell it."
incredible. I
And
had
so,
no
like, I'm just
idea.
now that you're mentioning like Finn Wolfhard and the Bill Hader thing, I can't get the image, the scene out of my mind of like maybe Chosen Jacobs just being like, I want the Old Spice guy to
I
play
want the old.
older me.
Well,
I
I do
want to
have
be the old
everyone else's background. So Isaiah Mustafa, he auditioned, like auditioned the old school way, Andy Bean, who was the adult version of Stanley, also auditioned. Jay Ryan, who played the adult Ben, he was challenging to cast because of the whole physical transformation storyline. So he had to submit photos of him as a child to compare to the child actor for him to be shown to show a resemblance. But
Okay, so you had to prove like, yeah, I used to be a fat kid. I used to be
he at
chunky.
least used to be like I at least share some physical resemblance. But
Gosh, I
James,
could have been in this movie then.
you could. Who knows? I mean, are you a good actor?
Well, my wife tells me I'm dramatic, so
You're a great dungeon master and you voice all the characters beautifully. So I would say you're a good actor. But anyways, James Ransom, he who played adult Eddie, he auditioned for a role in It Chapter 1 and wasn't cast. But
mm,
his brother convinced him to audition for It Chapter 2 because they realized that he looked a lot like the younger Eddie, which I think was a great redemption arc story for him to having auditioned for part 1 and not getting it.
what did he audition for in part one? Like just a,
I don't know, just
someone's.
probably a smaller role, but I wanted to mention a couple more small things about the casting, including real quick, one weird thing that the studio did was they had the child actors write letters to the adult actors because they didn't interact a lot. It's not like they're in scenes together.
I heard they only had one actual interaction at the beginning when they were doing read-throughs for the scripts, and then besides that,
Yeah. And
didn't
then
really.
like premieres and stuff, but that's after everything's filmed. So they wrote letters to the adult stars in character so they could get an idea of the characters outside of watching it part 1 and the book. And then the child actors also gave framed photos of themselves to the adult actors, which Bill Hader in particular thought was super weird.
So you got a framed photo of Finn Wolfhard?
Well, he actually, as like a prank, snuck it back into Finn Wolfhard's trailer one day during filming because
That's
he was
funny.
like, this is weird. But then let me add a couple more quick points. So this was Andy Machete's quote about the casting, and then I will share a brief note about the casting director. So Andy Machete said, during the production, we started playing with names and speculating who would play the adult counterparts, said the Helmer. I was very lucky that I got everyone I wanted to play the movie. Half the cast was pre-thought about and the rest auditioned. This was from San Diego Comic Con 2019, which pretty much sums up what we just talked about. 2 were
Mhm.
pre-chosen. Bill Hader was definitely talked about beforehand, and then the rest of them auditioned. But the casting director, his name's Richard Delia from Richard Delia Casting. He has over 100 IMDb casting director credits. He's had a lot of horror casting director credits, so I feel like that's worth mentioning. The Long Walk from 2025, Final Destination Bloodlines 2025, Abigail 2024, The Babysitter 2017, the 2 new Scream films, and a few films from the Annabelle and Conjuring franchise, as well as the casting for King Richard, which was an Academy Award winning film starring Will Smith. So, yeah, that's, I feel like, an interesting breakdown of Rich Delia's line of work. For those of you who don't know, casting is now going to be an Oscars category moving forward, which I think is important because
Ooh.
they do a lot of negotiating and finding the right actors to be in these films. So I think it's
You
really
got out
cool
of the
that they
game
get their own
squirrely,
category.
Kylie.
I know. Damn it. I should have been in casting just a little bit longer. You know what? I enjoy what I do behind the scenes because nobody knows me at this point. So I kind of like that.
Oh, but man, you could have gotten. Maybe there could have been a future where you get an Academy Award. Maybe there still is, though.
I appreciate you manifesting that on me. That's like really good energy. But one last thing about the actors, there was Andy Machete is known for doing a lot of takes over and over again to the point where it's painful. So there were like James McAvoy tore his quad because he was doing a lot of his own stunts, and Isaiah Mustafa was injured from slamming the chair in the Chinese restaurant down so many times that he actually broke a bone in his hand.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that makes sense. That scene was pretty I don't know. It's weird to say violent because obviously there's so many worse things, but they definitely got destructive with that scene.
Oh, definitely. No, it was fascinating. But that's what I had on the actors. I just thought the casting for this film, especially because people talk about young to old casting, and they usually reference Euphoria, which is a film that was really well cast for the young cast to the adults. Like the casting
Hmm.
director did an incredible job of that. Found really, really talented and precise lookalikes, but this film did as well. And I think we'd be remiss not to address that. For the last part of our deep dive, the novel versus the movie. And I'm going to prerequisite this by saying we did an extensive deep dive on book versus movie in part one. So go check out that part too, because we have a lot more probably there. But go ahead, kick us off with the book versus the movie for it, chapter two.
Yeah, so similar to you, I haven't read the book, so it feels a little weird talking about this and which aspects we prefer. But
Mhm.
at the same time, I feel like there's some grace on us because it's a 1,000-page novel, as you said. That's a monster to
Yes.
read.
Yes.
But with that preface in mind, so I have a list here of categories of different differences. And
Okay.
first thing is like structural and timeline changes. So the first thing we see is that the novel likes to alternate between the main group as adults and then children. So we see
Mhm.
that in the throughout the movie. It's not something we necessarily liked, but
Yeah.
we
More
see
so
that.
because it ate up time, but
But here's the difference. The book actually does a lot more flashing back and forth between kids and adults,
oh,
like throughout the
interesting.
entirety of the book. So, when you think about it, the movie really restrained itself to an extent
Mm.
because it has the first movie with just all just kids the whole time. We get some scenes with the kids
Which I
in.
think was smart because like it chapter 1 would not have been as successful if half the movie was flashbacks.
Exactly. It still didn't end up being so great in the second movie. But I see
Mhm.
why what they were trying to go for. They were trying to make it a bit more parallel to the storyline, the narrative style of the. But yeah, I feel like they could have cut it out. But just one of the biggest ones that most people know about is that the book takes place in the late 1950s,
Mhm.
and then the mid 1980s, and then in the movie completely different. So late 1980s is when the movie takes place, and now we get the mid is the place or the setting for them as adults.
Honestly didn't mind that time adjustment honestly because I feel like it allowed audiences to relate more if anything.
Oh, 100%. Because a lot of the horrors, and we talked about this in the first one, a lot of the horrors that the kids faced in the
Mhm.
1950s in the original novel were 1950s specific things that would have scared people, like some of the classic monster movies, where, that wouldn't really work as well today because,
Yeah, like mummies. I remember in the final scene of this movie they reference mummies once. But yeah, you're right. Like there's the things that scared us then wouldn't scare us now so much, and even a lot of the issues they touch on in the novel, whether that's abuse, whether that's racism, whether that's that, it's still applicable into 2016 or like the late 2010s when they have it chapter 2 taking place.
Mhm.
You know what I thought was interesting is one of the biggest differences that I learned about book versus movie was the ritual of Chud, which
Yes,
is much
yeah,
more of a psychic battle between Bill and it, which is like this dream sequence type thing. And it involves Marin the turtle too, to a certain degree, which
yeah. I'm so glad that they steered away from that because just hearing about it, I'm just like trying to picture what trying to adapt that to a movie, and it sounds terrible to me.
which is
It sounds
probably
challenging.
why they adapted it because they aren't living like I'd be so curious to read this book just to see if I can understand, obviously, the very prolific nature of Stephen King's writing, because he's easily one of the best horror novelists of all time. But he also has things like this, like the macro universe and Marin the turtle and battles of good versus evil and stuff. So I would like to understand it more because I think similar to you, when I read it just in my like research, I'm like, that's not scary. But I think within his writing style, it probably actually is quite scary. I actually do have a copy of Pet Cemetery on my bookshelf I've yet to read. So maybe I need to start with that and go from
Better get
there.
on it. Ooh, that's a good question. So, have you ever actually read a Stephen King novel?
So what's funny is the last time I was at the airport when I was going to see Elise and the rest of my family in Seattle,
Mhm.
I was trying to reach a Stephen King novel, but I was too short to reach it, and no one was around to help me. It was like way up on this shelf, and I'm like normal height. I'm like 5'4.5", and I couldn't reach it. So I was standing on my tiptoes like an idiot trying to grab this Stephen King novel. So I ended up grabbing a different horror themed novel instead, which was fine. It was a good book, but no. My answer is no, because I tried to grab a shorter Stephen King novel at the airport in Burbank, and I couldn't reach it because I was too small.
Oh, poor Kylie. So small.
So small, just like a grain of rice over here.
No.
But
Oh,
that's a side tangent. But yeah, I've never actually completed a Stephen King novel. Have you?
actually, I did in high school.
What did you
It was
read?
it was not one of his most popular ones. It was, I forget what the title was, but the whole premise was cell phones were turning people into zombies.
Oh,
That,
there is a novel called Cell.
that would be it. Cell. Yeah, that would totally be it.
It says, Cell, your number is up. Fun. I kind of like that. Cool. Well, good to
Yeah.
know. Worth adding to the reading list. But yeah, book versus movie. I mean, I think the other thing too was in the book, according to the Pennywise Lives Again documentary, Pennywise is more on the defense because he's going against the adults and on the offense with kids. But in the movie, this Pennywise is like, "Welcome home, my children," and he's like very aggressive and threatening with having them back. But that was something tonally that changed. But I think like we can agree probably the biggest differences are the ending. Like yes, the heart is ripped out of Pennywise at the end, but how it happens, how they get there, the ritual chod is very, very different.
Oh, yeah, and honestly, I prefer this ritual chud in the movie
Mm-hmm.
versus the book. Although I still wish they didn't undermine it by having Mike just be like, "Oh no, actually it didn't work," and oh well,
Yeah,
let's
it
figure
would have been
something else out.
cooler if it worked because I guess from a D&D problem solving perspective, like you put all the pieces together and then the puzzle should work. Um,
Mhm.
I also like in the book, Mike wasn't like consistently a liar. I liked that he still had a role, but his whole lies and his whole intention is completely skewed in the movie where he's like he could have been forthcoming from the get-go.
Mhm.
And then Henry
Oh, yeah,
Bowers in the book had a much much larger role as well.
yeah, and that gets into some character differences there. You're talking about Mike and Henry specifically. From what I'm
Mhm.
understanding, apparently Mike was the one who gets severely injured by Henry in the book,
Oh, interesting.
and he actually ends up not being able to join the final battle because of it.
That's so fascinating, especially when he's the one that's like, let's do this ritual, guys.
Hmm. And then, oh, this is the other thing, and you can tell me what you think about this, but from what I understand, what I found online,
Mhm.
Stanley's suicide is presented differently in the book.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
In the novel, he presents himself as being overwhelmed with terror, and he leaves his motivations ambiguous, meaning that there's no letter at the end explaining why he did it.
Mm.
I think that might be a better presentation. I still wouldn't call that perfect,
Yeah.
but at
I
least they're
mean,
not
there's no
trying to.
perfect way to depict that. And I honestly like the quest for the individual tokens and stuff was not in the book. And I think similar to you, we're both kind of like, I would have been okay with that. Just because like that quest took a lot of time.
Mhm.
Also, it separated everyone. Does nobody know the rules of surviving a horror movie? You don't
Well, they talk
separate.
about that in the movie. They're like, "No, we should separate." But then Mike makes the point, even though he doesn't fully believe that this ritual will work. He kind of does, but also he knows that it fails. He's like, "No, no, no. We have to do it by ourselves. That's the key importance to this thing." He's trying really hard to make this ritual work, but I feel like he believes and he wants it to work so bad,
Well,
but
because he
he
thinks
doesn't.
the answer is belief in the end. He's like, well, if we just believe it, it'll be. And then the answer is just bullying the clown in the end.
Well, no, no. So I think it is. Faith has an aspect to play in defeating Pennywise because you even get the whole thing with like the thing where like Beverly hands Eddie the was it like a poker or a metal rod or something, and he's like,
Yeah.
"What is this supposed to do?" And she's like, "It kills monsters." And he goes, "Really?" And she goes, "If you believe it does." And then he uses it, and it
He
does
goes,
some big
yeet.
damage. It
Yeah.
does some big damage
It
to
does some
Pennywise.
big damage and then he
So
dies.
Faith, and then you see it in the first movie too. Once the kids start like stop living in fear of him and just start realizing, oh no, you're just a stupid clown.
Mm-hmm.
Once they have that faith, it overcomes Pennywise. So faith has a role to play, but I think there's a little bit of doubt in Mike's mind because he knows that the ritual didn't work the first time. And I
Mm.
think there's also doubt in his friends because they don't realize that it's about faith. They just think
Yeah.
that if they go through the motions, it should work, but they don't know anything about it. And they even have doubt
That's
about Mike.
interesting. Yeah, because
It's
there
part
is,
of it is
I
because
think
they
the
have doubt
faith
in Mike.
factor is something that's overlooked. Because I think faith, to a certain degree, is a really big theme in horror movies, faith and belief. Because
Mhm.
it's whether you're believing in the bad or believing in the good. And I think Mike, you do a really good job of summing that up because he is the symbol of belief. He's the one who's
Mhm.
done all the research. He's the one who spent 27 years. A, they can defeat this entity entirely, and B, that this entity is still out there. And once his point is proven, he can continue on this path of belief and try to convince other people to believe with him. But that is an interesting perspective because I honestly hadn't thought about it in that way because it is like a little bit supernatural horror, but like not really because it's hard to take a clown turning into a spider-like entity from that angle. Yeah, but there were some gnarly kills in this movie. Do you have like a personal favorite?
My favorite
Like
kill,
when
probably.
Pennywise lures somebody in, do you have a favorite of that?
Honestly, my favorite kill of the film.
Mm-hmm.
Might seem a little weird. I really like when Bill has to shoot his younger self.
No, that's a really powerful scene because he's finally healing from his own trauma.
I know it's just like the whole idea that like his younger self is like, you shouldn't have. You're the reason that our brother died. Da 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 da. And
Yeah.
it's just kind of funny to me a little bit too. Like it's weird to say, but it was almost comedic to me how he just kind of pulls out the same gun but out of nowhere from
Yeah.
the water.
He's like from the water, he's like,
Actually, you're the one getting shot today.
surprise. My favorite line at the end is where I think it's Eddie, where he's like, beep, beep, and then like throws the spear. That just made
Oh
me
yeah,
laugh.
because
But
it's such a weird line, but
it's such a
it's not
weird
as
line.
bad because it gets followed up with a great like demonstration of the whole faith thing we
A
talked about
great bravery and faith moment. Yeah.
and
And
having
you gotta have a line with that. You gotta have like your moment to say a catchphrase.
that feels like a very D&D thing
It does.
where you give the player the opportunity to roll first. They
Usually, yeah.
roll, they get like a nat 20, and then you're like, okay, well, what are you going to say? It's a nat 20. This is a big moment about the DM's like, this is a big moment about to illustrate for our players here. What's your thing going to be? And you say something really stupid.
Because that's the best way to do it. No, there's some realism to that. Speaking of which, do we think
Mhm.
we can survive this horror movie?
Ooh, yeah. So I gave some thought about this.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely, my real answer is no. There's no way I'm surviving this. In fact, that's like the first thing I write down here. Realistically, I would never survive against Pennywise.
Right.
I say that as a person who I jump scare too easily sometimes. And there are certain horror movies that after I watch them will leave me scarred for like a week or so. Just like
Oh,
staying up late at night, like I can't be alone at night. Oh my gosh, there's something watching
somebody
me.
hold me.
I do think though
Mm-hmm.
that if I were placed up against some Pennywise like creature,
Mm-hmm.
it would have to be more of a marathon than a sprint. I would
Yeah.
ha- I would have to suffer through being horrifying for a while. And
Mm-hmm.
this is very similar to what happens in the movie. Eventually, and assuming that Pennywise and just seems to enjoy the taste of my fear, as long
Yeah.
as he gets that from me, he's not going to kill me. So, you
You
know,
just give him a little fear. You tease him with your fear.
exactly. And then like as he continues to, scare me, I build up a tolerance like, okay, you know what, this doesn't I'm sick of this. I'm
Mm-hmm.
overexposed to this. I'm just getting frustrated and I need to deal with this.
Mm.
That is what I imagine would be the situation that could lead to me having some type of victory. Because
Mm.
then through frustration and through
Being
eventually
worn
just
down.
working out my mind of like, I just need to overcome this. None of this is real. What's
Mm-hmm.
happening? Then I could, defeat Pennywise. But it all works off the assumption that he doesn't just kill me immediately. He likes my fear.
Yeah. No, that is the interesting part because I think back to the RPG part one, which if you haven't listened to it, you should. Our wonderful guests, Kayla and Luis, are coming back. But I almost died. All of us almost died. Pennywise was a really powerful entity to fight against. And I think, like, realistically, similar to you, I probably wouldn't survive against Pennywise because he's psychological and physically scary. So like he can do stuff to you from afar and up close. So I think you just don't know where he is at all times. I mean, but you bring up something interesting with the like luring him in with your fear. But honestly, if I'm not a D&D character who has like my guiding bolt in my healing word, I'm going to die. As a real person, I'll die. And I accept that fact. I think this has been the first movie monster that we've come across where I've been like, yep, I'll be dead. I'll be the first girl to die, maybe, because that would just be more interesting for the plot. I'm very excited to play when we're recording this tomorrow for you guys listening next week.
So, everyone, thank you all for listening to our amazing deep dive. It's been an amazing conversation with Kylie. Also, as always, just want to say make sure that you like the video, or if you're listening on Spotify or something, like the podcast, leave a comment, all that great stuff. I feel like there's great discussions here that we would love to get your opinions on.
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing I'll bring up before we leave is just that this is actually my last deep dive with Kylie here. It's been a wonderful journey. I have loved being in at this podcast from the beginning. I remember just texting Kylie on a random day, just saying, "Hey, what if we did a podcast together?" And it hasn't been a perfect journey, but honestly, I have loved doing this. It's been a lot of fun, and it's disappointing to go, but I feel like there's other aspects of my life that I want to explore and give more focus and time to. I'm just taking a step away for a little while. So I think there'll still be plenty of great quality to this. And I know that Kylie has had a lot of the reins and will continue to have a lot of the reins of the show. and she's very great at you know being creating some great entertainment for everyone who loves to listen to this. So the quality of the show will not be disappearing anyway, just because of my absence, for sure.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I could ever replicate your DM level of voices as a dungeon master, but I will say Nick hopefully will be coming back as a dungeon master and as a player every once in a while whenever he's free or interested. And
Oh,
in the
definitely.
meantime, we'll be cooking up some exciting things for you next year. But make sure to listen to this final RPG series that will be dungeon mastered by Nick before we break into the new year. But thank you
Definitely.
guys for listening, and thank you, Nick, for the last 2 years. We've not only grown together as brother and sister in law, but we've had a lot of fun, a lot of discussions. And as literally my parents will say, this is how our conversations are most of the time when we're just in person. We just talk
Hmm.
about movies. That's kind of where this idea came from. So it definitely won't be the same without you, but I'm so excited to see what you're going to do next. But in the meantime, we'll see our audience next week. So thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.
Yep. Have a good rest of your day, everybody. Love y'all.